So about a year ago, I had the thought of printing keycaps since I wanted Colmac Legend keycaps for cheap. So here's the story of how I did that. First thing I did was to go to thingiverse.com and find keycaps. There's a bunch to choose from, but for some reason I gravitated towards the Key V2 Paramedic keycap library by Arsheldi. I think I chose these keys because it was very well documented and the instructions was easy to follow if you have enough patience and some level of text editing skills. So I followed the instructions on the GitHub page. I downloaded OpenSCAD, installed it, and then downloaded the library file and was kind of stumped at what to do. So I asked around on Facebook on how to do CAD stuff. Someone mentioned using Fusion 360. Long story short, I downloaded, installed, and played around with the app and kind of uninstalled it after 10 minutes as I didn't have the motivation to learn the software from scratch. So anyway, I took the time to read through the GitHub documentation for the Key V2 keycaps, and it turns out I just had to set the parameters correctly and render all the keycaps one by one. Now at the time, I was still using flat profile XD or DSA keycaps, so I opted for the DSA layout. But I also had the thumb keys to be inverted so it will be more comfortable to tap on. Now once that's done, then came the part of finding someone who could print them since I don't own a 3D printer. I went over to Shopee, searched for 3D printing services, and a whole bunch came out. The seller that I chose was nice enough to explain what materials were available and how the expected result would look like. He mentioned that the keycaps will be rough and would see obvious layer lines since they were too thin. So he recommended to use resin, but being the poor sod that I am, I went on with PLA filament since resin was like 7 times more expensive. A week after, the prints arrived, and just as what the seller described, the surface of the keys were rough. And to be honest, they didn't have the best feel at all compared to any of the keycaps that I've had before. What I did after that was to cut the keys from the prints, took my Dremel out and removed the stem supports, and then I buffed the key surface as much as I could without erasing the legends so the layer lines wouldn't be so obvious. So in the end, the feel of typing on these were, well, cheap and sucky-ish. Well, they are plastic and they are thin, so in terms of sound or anything, they weren't amazing at all. However, the fact that they were legended as Colmac keys and the low-cost effort I spent on these made me feel okay to use them for a couple of months. Well, that was before I just decided to just go with blank OEM caps in the end. But hey, they were usable as keycaps and that's all I needed. To the seller's credit, he was right with the resin keycaps. I still use the resin space key on my BM40 to this day. The resin keycap surface is smooth and I'd imagine they'd be nice to have as keycaps. But then again, I'd rather spend 200-300 ringgit for custom printed PBT keycaps though. So that's it. Would you want to print your own keycaps? Give a thumbs up if you would. ご視聴ありがとうございました。